How many of you know your ancestral history? Seriously, by show of hands, how many of you know or are curious to know? Okay. I was recently joking with one of my friends that I do not want to know my ancestral heritage. I've been a proud black woman since I was about 14 years old. This is me at 14. And I realized that, what if I find out, after all these years of being pro-black, that I am mostly Swedish? I do not want to know, right? So in all seriousness, while it's cool that we can now trace our DNA to a tiny village in northern Italy or a tribe in Central Africa, if all you know about your family tree is the geographic and the ethnic story, I'd argue that you still don't know who you are. As a diversity and a social justice practitioner, I've discovered that there is an inextricable link between our identities and our traumas. Knowing where our roots come from is more than just race and ethnicity. We really have to know the ancestral hurts to get to the whole story. So what I know about my family tree is that one side of it goes to Germany, and the other side of the tree stops at a plantation in Virginia. But I knew there was something deeper than that. It goes deeper than that. No more going over and under and around the issues. I knew that if I needed to go through my emotional baggage, I also had to go through the emotional traumas in my family. In preparation for this talk, I literally had to dig into some areas of the family tree that we had avoided, the trauma roots. What I realized in my family tree redefined my journey in becoming a social justice advocate from just a mere coincidence to a destined pathway. This pathway will finally lead to the breaking of burdens that have been generationally passed on to me inadvertently and that I might have passed on to my children. This is a story about going over, under, around, and through trauma, and some important people are going to help me share the story with you. This is my grandpa, Jack. Now let me go ahead and level set here. You may have noticed that Jack is white. And I am not, right? I'm biracial, and that is part of the story. My grandpa Jack had underlying damage from his own hurts. After the death of his mother, all 5 of his siblings were sent to live with other relatives, except he, by himself, was sent to an orphanage, possibly because of a physical disability. He had limb reduction and a malformed arm. A couple years later, he was reunited with his family, but he had become tough, hardened by that point. So Jack grows up, but even before that, let's go back up. Growing up in the 20s and 30s, let's be honest, there was a pronounced framework of racism in white America. And unfortunately, my grandfather, Jack, fell into the norm of that period. So now imagine Jack growing up. He goes to college, he gets a degree, he becomes a gym teacher, a visual artist. He marries his sweetheart, Alma. They establish a family. He works 2 jobs to provide the American dream for his household. And of these 3 kids, one of them is going to be his oldest son, Tony, my dad, who you're going to meet momentarily. Next up is Doc. Doc is my maternal grandfather. Doc didn't have Jack's underlying damage, but he had overwhelming pressure from being a black doctor. Listen to this one. A black doctor in the 30s and the 40s in the United States. Not many of those, right? Doc came from rural Tennessee, also from a big family. And because he was an intellectual, and this is during the Jim Crow era, because he was an intellectual, his family banded together, pooled their money and their resources, and decided he's going to be the one. Kind of like Neo from The Matrix, except black. And the Jim Crow era. Right? So Doc then goes to medical school. He then goes to the Army, becomes a medic in World War II, comes back, relocates his family to a well-to-do black community in Ohio, practices pharmacology in a drugstore, compounding his own medicines. He marries his sweetheart, Louise, and they have a daughter, Patricia, my mom, who you're going to meet in the next layer of the story. So just to get tabs on where we are here. We've got Jack, who we started with, and his underlying damage. We have Doc and his overwhelming pressure. Now in this story, Jack and Doc have kids. So let's meet Patricia and Tony. This is my dad. This is Tony. Sometimes I call him Tone. He doesn't know that. Well, he does now. He knows he's here tonight. This is Tony. He's Jack's son. Tony is shy and reserved. He came up in Jack's household, this working class American household. Now, although this household gave passive permission to segregation, there was something in Tony that was still open. His experiences were a little bit different. He went to an integrated high school, black and white students, and what he found in his personal experience was that the kids who befriended him were the black kids, his cross-country teammates, his lunch table allies. So he's experiencing cognitive dissonance because all the bad things he's heard about race mixing aren't true for him. So he doesn't talk about it, but he internalizes it. He doesn't process it out loud and he doesn't fight it. He works around the race issue by befriending the very people that possibly his family didn't want him to interact with. Now we move on to my mom. This is Patricia. Patricia's Doc's daughter. Now Patricia experienced trauma when she was 5 years old. Doc came home one day and he breaks up a domestic violence dispute of a neighbor. Later on that evening, that neighbor, that abuser, murdered him. His dying wish was for his daughter, his only child, to be well educated. So the family, the surviving members, convert from Baptist to Catholic so Patricia could go to private school. She is classically trained as a scholar, a pianist, a debutante, an amateur ballet dancer. Patricia has money and all the things that an upper middle class lifestyle brings, with the exception of skin privilege. She integrates a school, and the scars from integration leave her with post-traumatic stress disorder. So she's battling with these race issues, but somehow she also still tries to stay open. So now, Tony trudged through his own and his dad, Jack's, underlying damage. Patricia labors through her own and her dad, Doc's, overwhelming pressure. And somehow, working around race, these two cross paths, fall in love and get married. That's right. So, to be clear, the son of the dad, who was against interracial marriage, goes into covenant with a black woman. The daughter of the dad, who went to segregated schools, marries a white guy. And then they have me. So Tony and Patricia, they don't process these things out loud through the context and the lens of race. They work around the race issue, hoping that love is going to be enough. But it wasn't. I still inherited a complicated race story. I was the biracial child of a couple who divorced only 2 years after I was born. So Tony moves on, he remarries, but he's still a very present father in my life. My mom's the primary custodial parent, and through the trajectory of my childhood, we live in predominantly black, lower income communities. So what ends up happening with me is in growing up, I'm trying to process what my light skin means, what my fuzzy brown hair means, why my black friends don't treat me the same as everyone else. But then when I visit my white family, I feel very different there too. I need to discover what this race stimuli means to and for me. Who am I in the construct of race? Why aren't my parents talking about this? Why do the family members look so different? And why is my family tree lopsided? I was struggling to figure this out, but I knew that this part of the pathway was mine and mine alone. I had to figure this out for myself. So just like everyone else, I grow up. I attend several different high schools, 6 to be exact, in 2 different states. I work in lots of different environments in different communities after college and graduate school. my life is heading in a trajectory that is dead ending into social justice. But then I realized, after I find my groove as a diversity practitioner, diversity and inclusion is so much more than identity. It's more than, bigger. Again, this inextricable link. And I've got to figure out how to get to and through my story. My story was a lotus flower. And it's pushing through that mud. You know how lotus flowers grow. They've got to push through that mud and that dirt, and they only bloom on the top of the water. That was my story. And I had to figure out how to get through all that mud to bloom at the top. So even in this pathway, it also led me right here among all those high schools. One of the 6 high schools I went to was Hilliard Davidson, when there was just one high school in Hilliard. But I was here as one of very few black students during the Rodney King trials, 1992. This is incredibly tough for me, having been in predominantly black environments, to now be in a suburban high school, even being half white. I had never been around that many white people before, and I was very uncomfortable. And this is just an example of how complex this road and this pathway has been for me. But I tell you what, it hasn't been easy, and I'm still traveling down it, but I am so grateful for this journey that I've been on, because it has allowed me to be a voice for other people. By addressing and surviving things head on, everything that I survived, by addressing it head on, taught me how to be a better fighter for myself and for other people. This pathway from Jack to Tony to me, this pathway from Doc to Patricia to me, a convergence of opposite sides of the spectrum that led to a new paradigm. So as I prepare to close, I ask that we, just like Tony and Patricia, we need to stay open. Who is it that you need to have a conversation with that you've been avoiding, where there might be some healing that can come from there? What do you need to do to push through your own mud so that you can be that lotus flower that blooms? Who have you made a foe in your minds that you need to transform from being a one-dimensional enemy to a complicated, three-dimensional human being? So we have met Jack and Doc and Tony and Patricia. I'd like to share the meaning of my name with you. My mom is notorious for telling the story about how she was pregnant with me for 10 months. All the women in here are like, God bless her. She's here, so you can give her a hug today. My mom was pregnant with me for 10 months. In the last trimester of the pregnancy, there was a period of time where I stopped moving. I was completely inactive, and she was worried that I wasn't going to survive the pregnancy. So my mother prayed to God that he would deliver me from the womb safely, like he delivered Daniel from the lion's den in the Bible story. In the 44th week of gestation, the placenta stopped working, but I was born healthy, wrinkled, but strong. In gratitude for me being born healthy and for her believing that God kept that promise, my parents named me after a survivor. I did not avoid the lion's den. I had to go all the way through it. But on the other end of it, I found life. I found life. For those of you out here who want to make sure that someone you care about, someone you love, inherits your resiliency instead of your trauma, I wish you bravery and I wish you success in trudging through your own mud and your own rocks to get to where you need to go. Sometimes we cannot go over, we cannot go under, we cannot go around, we have to go all the way through. And what's waiting for us on the other side? My name is Kimberly Danielle, and I will see you at the breakthrough. Thank you.